When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Thank you again for joining me on the history of the papacy. I am your host, Steve, and we are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, including Scott Rank's History Unplugged, James Early's Key Battles of American History, Richard Lim's This American President, and now featuring Josh Cohen's Eyewitness History. Head on over to ParthenonPodcast.com to learn more. I'd like to quickly mention, as I want to do, that we are on Patreon at patreon.com/history of the papacy. There's 4 tiers, each with their own unique benefits. But the big one is the inclusion on the history of the papacy diptychs. But not only that, you get bonus audio and video content, Pope Coin, monthly book drawings, early content, and ad-free early content. Sign up early so that you can have your name at the top of the lists. Now, let us commemorate the Patreon patrons on the history of the papacy diptychs. We have Roberto, Joran, William, Brian, Jeffrey, Christina, John, and Sarah at the Alexandria level, Dappo, Paul, Justin, and Lana, all of whom are magnificent at the Constantinople level, and reaching that ultimate power and prestige, that of the See of Rome, we have Peter the Great. Today, I am joined yet again by scholar Annie Humphries to discuss how the Vikings/Norse developed their views on their own traditional religion in light of their interaction with Christianity. We will also look at how the Norse in Ireland absorbed, developed, and even used Christianity to advance their position in Ireland during the early medieval period. Christianity was well established in Ireland by the time the Norse arrived, and Christianity was a powerful cultural force for the Norse to adopt, but also adapt to their own goals and needs. I am very excited to talk about this topic, and with that, here is the next piece of the mosaic of the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church. What were some of the similarities and differences between the way the Norse interacted with the locals in Ireland as opposed to Scotland or some of the other, Celtic areas, you might call them?
Ooh, that's a good question. I feel like Alex Wolff would be the one to read the books on, because I have a personal interest in the Isle of Man, but I don't think I'd be able to systematically talk about the relationship of, say, Picts or people in Eastern Scotland, and their relationship with the Norse there. I haven't studied it enough that I'd be able to I'd be able to talk about it in detail. I do have to say that Ireland does have a really thick analytic and as well as this dynastic propaganda, whereas it's a lot lighter on the ground in Isle of Man in Scotland. So that in of itself might make that lost to time.
Now, getting into the interaction they had religiously, could you tell us a little bit about Norse religion?
Absolutely. Okay, so Norse religion at this time was aware of and being touched by and being shaped by both Roman religion as well as Christianity. There was no sense of a pan-Norse pantheon. There was no sense of a series of priesthoods or a centralized system of okay, these people go to this school for training and then they go back to their hometown. Now there were religious centers, but they were really only important for people within 1, 2, 3 days ride or travel. There was not this concept of there is one holy place and everything derives from it. It was very much local familial deities got bigger and bigger. There's plenty of anthropological work on the cults of Odin, the cults of Tyr and Thor and these gods. So when we talk about Norse religion at this time, it's a religion that is only thinking about itself as it is being replaced. People didn't have to think about what their relationship was to the gods or to land when it was just everything, when it was just the way you did things. And now people are coming with crosses on their chests saying there is only one God and this is the God. And now these people who have just believed what their ancestors believed are going, I don't know what I believe, but it's not a cross. I feel really close to this Thor guy. I'm going to wear a hammer. People weren't wearing hammers 2,000 years ago. They were wearing them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they didn't have a sense of formal religion. Now, that's not to say that it wasn't important to them. It's not to say that there weren't priests. There absolutely were. There were holy sites and really fabulous rites that left behind some really fascinating archaeological stuff. But in the 9th century, in the 9th, 10th centuries, heathenry, the act of worshiping the old god, the foreign seether, the old ways, was really kind of crystallizing and as it was coming to a close, recognizing that now people are saying to change the god that you worship, and so you had to kind of wrap your head around the idea of having to culturally convert and change the way you worship and the way you do things. So Norse religion, like we nowadays we're all familiar with Thor and that mythology, but that mythology that we're using nowadays was pretty much codified at this time, and a few centuries later in Iceland in the forms of Snorri Sturluson's codifying the Norse myths, the Codex Regius collecting old skaldic poetry. It's powerful stuff. It's amazing stuff, but it's also, the swan song of a really big kaleidoscope of ways of seeing the world that had to get collapsed very quickly in the face of Christianity.
And in their day-to-day worship, would they have necessarily, you look in the Delaire's children's book of Norse mythology, and they have a chart of Thor here and Odin here. Is that how they would have conceived of it, or would have gone village to village? We're more of a Thor village here, and this is more because it's their culture. It was something that was really ingrained into their entire life. And it's not Christianity where it's this, and this, and it's doctrinal, and that it was something that and maybe imposed isn't the right word, but that's something that when you adopt Christianity, you're getting this manual of how to do it. Is that how Norse religion would have looked? And now a word from our sponsors.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hi, everyone. If you've been injured in an accident that was not your fault, listen up. We have legal professionals standing by to answer your questions for free. Call now and find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth. Call 800-910-7500. I'm here with spokesman John Wolf. So, John, tell everyone listening who should call right now.
Well, Maria, first off, thank you for having me here. It's always nice to answer the listeners' questions. Now, as far as who should call in, anyone who's been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, give us a call right now. 800-910-7500. You'll find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth.
Thanks, John. You heard it, folks. Take advantage of this opportunity and call now. 800-910-7500.
Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center. May not be available in all states. Not available in California.
Right, exactly. It's the opposite of that. It is do it yourself. It's what was handed down to you. So the way you said that we're a Thor family, or in this valley we honor Freyr, would very much be the way of things. And you can kind of see that with I don't know how many Norse names you've encountered, but sometimes you have families where every single kid is a Thorstein, Thora, Thorvald, and you're like, that's a Thor family. And then, gods were also be associated with social classes. A blacksmith would probably have a different deity than the fisherman, same village. But there was not this one big how-to guidebook. There was no dogma to it. It was doing right by the way things had always been done in your area, rather than some holy man imposing things from a manual, from a book or something like that. So, and even then things would have changed generation to generation, because this is all oral culture. There would be no book to record things. So if grandma forgot the words to the fertility rite and mom had to make up some new words, guess what? Daughters are now going to be using the new words, and it's just as accurate as what grandma did, because it was right for them in the moment. And I think we in our Western world, post-Christian, but still very beholden to this idea of there being one correct way of doing things, one correct document. Norse religion, as well as, most indigenous oral traditions, didn't have that immutability that we tend to think of in terms of religion.
And it's interesting because, we've moved past the idea that the Norse lived in this bubble, like Wonder Woman's thing, where they couldn't come in or out. They knew they were getting information from the Roman Empire, and then the successor empires and kingdoms that came out of there. Can you see in the record how they developed religiously and how they responded to these ideas that were coming out of main continental Europe?
These are such fantastic questions. Unfortunately, they were pre-literate at this time. So the answer to that question, I think, would be in the study of bracteates, which are golden discs that have some writing on them, but the very act of making these golden discs, which are meant to look like coins, meant to be these prestige objects, would show you kind of their relationship to literacy and to power. But it's not, Sven pulling out a journal and writing how he feels about the Franks. It's just very good guessing from what happens to have survived in the archaeological record.
Is there any evidence in the archaeological record that there was any early adopters of Christianity in Norse areas, or was it pretty much they were keeping to the pre-Christian religion there?
Well, I think we do have I did say that Iceland had no indigenous people. There is a tradition, an oral then literate tradition, that there were Irish monks there, and that they had left crosses and bells, and so there is some materiality to the idea of people being early adopters. But apart from the sagas, which are written long after this period, and certainly looking at things with a 12th and 13th century view rather than contemporary, the sagas will have people being sort of proto-Christians, like, well, he worshipped Thor, but also Christ, or she believed in Christ, but, couldn't be buried in a church, so he was buried at the high water mark. But I personally think those are more 12th and 13th century celebrating of the ancestors. I can't imagine somebody tapping into Christianity, which is such a pan-European phenomenon at the time, and, it's Christendom, and then saying, right, cool, I'm Christian now I'm going to go back and live with my horse meat eating relatives and just pretend, it's all good. I think to have become Christian before it became politically expedient would have meant leaving your family, would have meant leaving your community. And I'm not saying it couldn't have happened, but I can't see it as something that could have been adopted early by people who would just stay in their lives.
And then jumping over to Ireland, now they're really interfacing with a Christian society that has Christian institutions and a Christian mindset. You mentioned that in some of the places, the Norse, they were bringing their families, and you see a really big difference between a group that goes to settle a new place that brings their children and their wives and their extended families, and then they're not necessarily marrying into the local culture where they have to figure out that kind of messy situation of what we're going to do. What do we see in Ireland with those? Because there's intermarriage, but there's also people settling with their families and bringing a lot of that cultural, their cultural furniture with them.
Oh, I like that, cultural furniture.
Yeah, I just thought
phrase.
Of that too.
So because I'm, reading this dynastic propaganda.
Because baggage, baggage seems, that's loaded, but furniture isn't yet.
Yeah, no, baggage that's very loaded. It's loaded, it's heavy baggage. So since I'm dealing with dynastic propaganda literature, what I'm reading isn't very likely what actually happened, but it at least touches on cultural ideas of what happened. And so in the text I specifically study, like right now I'm thinking of the Cogad Gael Regaliv, the War of the Gael against the foreigner, this absolutely sprawling text where it said that when the Norse came, they recognized that people were both deferring to the power of and also giving a significant amount of money to their abbots, to the local abbots. And so the Norse would just step in and say, I'm the abbot now, look at me, I'm the abbot now. And so they would take over churches and thus receive all the power and blessings that and material wealth that the abbots had. But only in one place does it kind of indicate that this was a religious transfer. In the Cogad, there's this fantastic little throwaway line that's engendered so much scholarship, where Turgesh, this super Viking who's conquered so many lands, has taken over Clonmacnoise, which is this very big, powerful monastery on the Shannon River, the largest river in Britain and Ireland, at Athlone, at the highest point you can cross it, the ford of Lyon. And so at Clonmacnoise, Turgesh's wife Ota takes to the altar, according to the source, takes to the altar and performs witchcraft to give answers to her audience. So it's this very sexy, very cool little throwaway line that just is so powerful. And I don't know if this actually happened. I mean, I sure hope it did, because that sounds really cool. But I think
was that at really... a Christian altar or?
Yes, the altar of Clonmacnoise, of this massive monastery. So absolutely sexy and sacrilegious. Now, if this actually happened or not, I don't know. But it certainly captured the 11th century when it was written. The 11th century idea that these Norse are coming in and bringing their families and their heathen ways. Now, so the Cogad does this sort of kind of sexy thing. Another one of my sources, the Curval of Ossory saga, Claire Downham did this fantastic article about how there's kind of different kinds of Norse, and they're different by how adjacent they are to Christianity. So there's the Lochlani and the Danner. And so the Lochlani are, these heathen brutes, and just have no morals, nothing good about them. But the Danner, well, see, according to the source, see, they are pagan, but they don't eat meat or sleep with women after a battle, as kind of, and also they worship Saint Patrick too when it's convenient to them. And again, I don't think this actually happened, but it does reflect cultural ideas that there were steps for the Norse, that they could be heathen but also Christian adjacent. They could be, interacting with churches respectfully. They could be worshiping saints alongside their gods. It wasn't an all or nothing.
Before we dig in a little bit deeper into some of the specific, how did the organizational, sort of the government structure change when the Norse came? Because there's these kings in Ireland and they have a really unique system, but then you have the Norse coming in with their system. How did those two, were the Norse completely running the show? Did they impose their governmental structure, if you will, on the Irish? Did they sort of blend together?
Well, the systems were very similar. They were pretty much might makes right. Now, there were all kinds of machinations on the Irish side about dynasties, that I have the right to be the king of this region because my ancestor is so and so who claimed this land 1,000 years ago. So there are all these machinations, but the Irish were also really good about rewriting it when it was convenient. That Cogad Gael that I spoke about was basically this long thing to explain why Brian Boru, who came from a sub vassal family to become the High King of Ireland, well, they did some really fancy footwork to say, well, actually, his ancestors were the buddies of the ruling family in his area, and actually they had decided they were going to switch the kingship between the two of them. So he's just picking up old ways of being. So genealogists were not above making the current problems things that had been solved in ancient days. And so the Norse were capable of being written into this, because as they intermarry, as they're raising children who are part of these dynasties approved by the genealogies, they're also constructing these towns that are associated with them, and so they become the embodiment of these towns. In the Cogad specifically, when the Dune, the fortress of Dublin, is taken from Sitrick, his name you can hear is Norse, although he himself was from a mixed family. When he reclaimed his fort, when it was given back to him, it's specifically written as Adun, his fort. It was this concept that the Norse have the towns. And in another source, the Cahram Kellicon Cashel, the Norse go into battlefield as cities. There's this big thing about how they always wear armor. Now, I'm pretty sure the Irish would have been wearing armor too if they could get their hands on it. And I doubt every single Norseman was able to afford armor himself. But in the stories, all the Norse are covered in armor, and they walk in a city of spears, a phalanx of a town coming onto the battlefield. So I think this urbanization made a space for the Norse in the fabric of Ireland, because there were monastic centers, there were these, proto-towns, proto-trading centers, but outside of the Roman Empire, they had never had the oppida, they'd never had the castrum, the military towns. And so the concept of a place that existed solely for commerce, solely for artisans, solely for international trade outside of Ireland, came with the Norse. And so their space in the landscape was the town. And so that's how they inserted themselves into Irish politics. They were the keepers and the arbiters of the towns.
And then, so they come, and in sometimes they take on this role as, I'm the new abbot in town, as sort of a political position, or you have maybe this, even if it's apocryphal, it's a cool story of a woman doing a scandalous thing at the altar. How did they evolve into Christianity, the Norse, and then turning into the Hiberno Norse?
So there were these intermarriages happening, and while it seems strange to us that we think you'd hear all about, say, a Christian Irish woman converting her Norse heathen husband, we actually don't hear that much about it. It doesn't seem to show up in the sources as much as it does on the continent. But Christianity was very politically expedient. It helped kings, these Norse kings who already derived their authority from outside of Ireland, because they knew that they couldn't rely on the local dynasty to always support them. They had to look overseas as well for support. And they knew what side their bread was buttered on by how Christianity was becoming so important to the Norse and the Danelaw and the Norse in Normandy and so on and so forth. So when the aforementioned Citric founded Christ Church Cathedral in Dublin in the 11th century, it didn't look to Armagh or even to Kildare, these Irish centers of power. It looked to Canterbury because it was about bringing Christianity, but the authority of of English Christianity, of not Irish Christianity to Ireland. So this conversion to Christianity, again, we're not going to have Sven writing about why he chose to get baptized today. But it really seems to have been this sense of, we're surrounded by Irish Christians. We interact with English Christians. We're going to have to become Christian one way or another. Let's become English Christians so we aren't bound as much to the Irish Christians and their way of doing things.
Oh, so that's interesting. So that's kind of another conflict point, because we have the conflict between the Irish Christians and the English Christians over Easter controversy. And the Vikings the Norse rather, they're falling more towards the English way and the continental way. Yes. Things are done over the Irish.
Yes. Yeah. Now, we do know that they really like St. Bridget, and so we can actually trace Norse settlers elsewhere by them founding churches to St. Bridget, which personally I think is really very cool. But yeah, for the most part, they wanted to use Christianity as a means to leverage their international politics across Northern Europe. So to them, it made a lot more sense to plug into Frankish and English Christianity.
And now a word from our sponsors.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off, K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hi, everyone. If you've been injured in an accident that was not your fault, listen up. We have legal professionals standing by to answer your questions for free. Call now and find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth. Call 800-910-7500. I'm here with spokesman John Wolf. So, John, tell everyone listening who should call right now.
Well, Maria, first off, thank you for having me here. It's always nice to answer the listeners' questions. Now, as far as who should call in, anyone who's been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, give us a call right now. 800-910-7500. You'll find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth.
Thanks, John. You heard it, folks. Take advantage of this opportunity and call now, 800-910-7500.
Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center. May not be available in all states, not available in California.
Now, this is always a tough question because there's really no statistics, but generally speaking, as far as a part of the percentage of the population, would you judge that the Scandinavians, the Norse, were they a little percent of the population? And especially compared to maybe other places, how much of an influence or an impact were they percentage wise, even though we have no idea of really percentages?
Well, you know what? If you go into this question not expecting much, you can get a lot. So I'm not going to be able to toss out a single number at you, but I can tell you what kinds of sources we can look at. Now, the very population of Dublin, which was the largest of the Norse towns, is still vastly all over the map, because if we go just by what's been discovered, then, no more than 1,000 people. But Paul Holm has done some really fascinating calculations on how many people would have been required to keep up the size of the fleet that was historically attested at Dublin. And now we're talking thousands of people. And so now are we saying that the people who live within the walls of Dublin are counted? Or what about a suburb? The hinterland, the Dublin Skier, or Dublin Shire, the area that traded with Dublin. How many of these people are considered Norse? How many of these people are considered culturally Norse? Maybe they speak a Norse language. How many of them are ancestrally from the Scandinavian lands? We don't really know. And then Limerick, Waterford, Cork, Wexford are going to be smaller numbers because they never had the population size of Dublin. So in that case, I mean, you're guessing as to the population of all of Ireland, and now guessing as to the population of these towns. We can't be talking more than single digits of the population. But what I think is really fascinating is that when you look at modern genetics, you do have a not insignificant portion of Scandinavian genetics, or originally from outside of Ireland, in these city regions, in people from Dublin and Limerick and so on and so forth. And I think that has to do with the fact that cities have just always had higher populations, higher population growth. Supposedly these redheads in Ireland are from the Scandinavian population, but specifically because the Scandinavian populations were in the towns, you're going to get more people and a higher percentage of the population. So to answer your question, I think we're talking, 2, 3, no more than 5% of the population in the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries. But these people who were descended from the Norse became known as Ostmen when the Normans came to Ireland, always had this kind of advantage of being artisans and craftsmen and townspeople. And so they probably had a higher population growth relatively to the rest of the island. That means that they're now genetically better proportioned.
I always think this is an interesting question to pose to scholars, especially somebody who studies the texts. What's a text if somebody was digging through their basement and found the perfect text? What would that look like to you? The Indiana Jones moment.
The Indiana Jones, yeah, where I can translate it as I read it. I think that's a great question. I think for me, a really great text would be a saga written in Norse and Middle Irish, so we could see, how, like, a Rosetta Stone of the two languages relating to each other directly, that talks about the Norse and how they feel about the Irish, and the Irish and how they feel about the Norse. I don't think that would be something that medieval people would be able to articulate in a way that we modern people would want it to be like, but I think that would be ideal for me. Some kind of dual origin written out in a bilingual way, or a guide how to become a Norse for the Irish and how to become Irish for the Norse.
Then I'm always fascinated too about this, and I love to ask scholars. Now, these texts you're looking at, they're in Norse, a form of Norse, and then they're also written in Irish. Are you also looking? Are there Latin texts? What's kind of the textual language that you're looking at here?
So for my PhD project, all of my texts are in Irish, in Middle Irish. And Middle Irish was 9th to 12th centuries. So it's actually coterminous with Old Norse, which was also 9th to 12th centuries. But we have Old Irish as well, whereas we just kind of have Proto-Norse. So Middle Irish, Old Norse, same time period, even though they've got different names. So these texts are all in Middle Irish. Now, there are a few little bits and bobs in Latin, and there are more things written in Latin in the annals, because they were meant for more of a clerical audience, more of a, this is our contribution to a history of the world. But the dynastic texts I'm looking at were written to be read aloud, used as authority by people outside of the church. So that's why they're written in a vernacular language. So I personally have, read texts in Latin, but my wheelhouse is much more in vernacular texts. What stories are people are telling about themselves.
When you approach these texts, are you reading English translations? And then when you want to kind of dig into something more, are you looking at the source language? How do you do that?
So I am lucky in that my three major sources have all been edited, but not very well. The Kerbal Apostrophe Saga was done most recently in 1974, and that one's held up pretty well. And I gotta throw one out for Celt at UCC that I can even access it online. So it's very nice to never be without my text. So that works well. But then my other text, the Catherine Kellicon Cashel, was edited in 1905 by a guy who was not that great at Irish. So while I am very, very thankful again that I can look at a photocopy of this book, I've definitely had to refer to the Irish script on screen and take a look at the manuscript, because sometimes the scholar wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. And then the Cogad Gael Regalav is just, it's an incredible work, and supposedly there will be a new edition of it coming out any decade now. But as of right now, the edition that everyone still uses is from 1857.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it's a great book for the middle of the 19th century. Again, it was a really fantastic publication for its time, and I'm very thankful to stand on the shoulders of giants. But so much scholarship has been done on it that I do need to take a peek at the. I haven't found an excuse to look at the Book of Leinster, which is one of the oldest books in existence in the Trinity Library. I kept really hoping I could find some reason, but I think I'm at the end of my project now. I won't be able to. But to look at the digital versions of the manuscripts and kind of double check the paleography and things like that.
What are some of the hot new things coming out in scholarship right now and what you're studying? Like, what's really getting you excited?
Well, honestly, Stephen, the things that get me most excited about this work are breaking down ideas of a fully white homogenous Europe where people are interacting with each other in modern ideas of European identity. That was just not a thing. These are people who are not living in a fantasy land. These are people aware of the Silk Road of trade outside of Europe. They're aware they're in a backwater. You know, if you look at medieval maps, England and Ireland are squished way down on the bottom. They are definitely aware of themselves as kind of on an awkward peninsula outside of the major engines of North African and Central Asian and Western and Southern Asian trade. And so things like that globalize the Middle Ages, that take us out of this idea of solely using the Middle Ages to support this idea of a white supremacist view of the world. That's the kind of stuff that makes me really excited. So while, I'm not going to be curing cancer by writing about the Norse, I do hope that I can at least get people questioning the idea that there was a homogenous Europe where everyone was happy with each other, and it was in a bubble and blah blah blah. I think seeing the way that pre-modern peoples interact with each other still has really big ramifications for how nations and different peoples today need to think about and react to each other.
Yeah, it seems that some of the older scholarship, it's all trying to fit things into narrow boxes, but not really trying to understand how they understood themselves. And that seems to be what you're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah. The very concepts of how ethnicity was generated and taken upon and changed even within people's lifetime.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World
I
off.
praise the mighty
K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hello, I'm David Jeremiah. And after 250 years, America has much to celebrate. But this time is also a moment to seek the Lord, because the hope of a nation is not found merely in outward strength, but in hearts that are turned toward God. Scripture reminds us that revival begins when God's people humble themselves in prayer, seek His face, and walk in Christ's ways. That is where lasting strength begins. So, as we thank God for America's past, let us also ask Him for spiritual renewal in our future. May He lead us, strengthen us, and pour out His blessing on this land we so dearly love.